All right, so we have 3 calls left. Today, we're going to focus in on herbicide traits, specifically around the soybean side of things. We're not going to get into corn, but I did want to spend a little bit of time. We talked somewhat about some of the modes of actions of herbicides, but I did want to spend some time talking about key learnings and some things that we need to be focusing on in 2022 for some of these soybean herbicide trait platforms. So whether it be dicamba, Enlist, or even just Liberty, we're going to talk about a little bit about each one of those and some of the key things that we have to be thinking about with each one of those. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about nozzle selection, gallons per acre, and pressure. Okay, and those are going to be really key focus areas because anymore with how tight herbicides are and where we're at price-wise for herbicides, people are going to be cutting back rates. And so we do need to make sure that we're spraying it correctly. So making sure we have the right gallons per acre, the right nozzles, all of that stuff is going to be extremely important this year. Now, as far as herbicide traits go, okay, obviously there's a lot of different herbicide traits on the market for soybeans right now. This demo, if any of you guys got out to the answer plots this past year, you were able to see this. This was a really cool demo to show how each one of these herbicide traits, which ones can tolerate which chemistries. Okay, so you'll notice with Enlist, the Enlist soybean, pretty much the 2,4-D, it survived the 2,4-D. So how this works, these soybeans were planted across ways here. So each one of these 2-row plots was a different soybean. So we had conventional soybeans, we had Roundup Ready 2 soybeans, Enlist soybeans, GTL 27, Extend. We were going to have Extend Flex in this year. We did have it this year, but we didn't have it last year. And this is a picture from last year's demo. But we had Extend here, Liberty, and Conventional. And then what we did is we took and we sprayed across the rows. Okay, so you can see here we had Enlist, Avalanche Ultra, Balance Flex, Liberty, Roundup, and XtendiMax. And you can see which ones survived in which places here. So, for example, when we sprayed 2,4-D or Enlist across all of these different trait platforms, obviously only the Enlist beans survived that. Okay, and that does make sense, right? That would be the only one that survived the Enlist section. Okay, with the Avalanche Ultra, it's a conventional herbicide. Pretty much every single bean survived that, no problem. Okay, Balance Flex, which, by the way, Balance Flex is not labeled to go over the top of any of these herbicide or any of these trait platforms, even the GTL 27s. Okay, the one that is going to go over top, this isoxaflutol that is going to be able to be labeled on soybeans, will most likely be as a pre only. It won't be as a post application. But you can see that the only one that really survived to a great extent was this GTL 27, having that balanced flex tolerance. Liberty, it killed every bean that didn't have the Liberty Link trait. So, for example, it killed conventional, Roundup Ready 2, just the straight Extend platform it killed, and then the conventional again down here. Okay, Roundup Ready soybean, or sorry, Roundup sprayed over the top, killed the Liberty, and then the 2 conventionals. And then finally, we had the Extend, which basically with the Extend, it killed everything but the Extend soybeans. So makes sense, right? Okay, but the key thing with this is to make sure that we're aligning the right chemistry with the right soybeans here so that we're not having any issues around that. And hopefully down the line, we're going to see more and more trait integration and see, like, for example, a 2,4-D dicamba stack. But for now, we do have to be cognizant of this. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up some of these issues, right? Okay, this past year, we saw a significant amount of cupping. Okay, and there's a lot of theories behind it, guys. There's a lot of different things. One of the most popular ones that's been floating around is on environmental loading. Guys, the environmental loading theory, if that is true, it's very selective to fields. Okay, because we've even had beans in our plots that one bean will cup and the next bean won't. Okay, not saying that there might not be a little dicamba in the air, but I will also tell you that I grew quite a few tomatoes this year, had no injury whatsoever to the tomatoes, and I know there was dicamba sprayed around the area. Okay, so I don't know if there's so much of that. I think personally it was a combination of, hey, we had some off-target movement on the corn, or even a little bit of off-target movement with the dicamba on the beans. I also walked some complaints where the sprayer didn't get cleaned out properly. But I think the biggest thing, and I think what's causing a majority of this is not so much the environmental loading. I personally think that a lot of it has to do with just genetics by environment. And the reason why this, it makes me think that, is because actually, I think Andy Dickus might even be on the line here, but Andy and I were walking the Jessup answer plot this summer. And we were, when we walk the plots generally, or at least this is how I do it, I generally walk down the center aisles so that I don't know which plot I'm looking at. And I came to some cup beans, and I had heard, oh, okay, some of the enlist beans are cupping. So I went and checked, and actually it was the Extend Flex beans that were cupping at that site, and only certain varieties. Okay, and Andy got really excited because Andy's like, oh, this is showing that, hey, we have some genetic diversity because certain ones are cupping and certain ones aren't, which I don't know. He gets excited about those type of things. But realistically, guys, because those were cupping, and I know that nothing had gotten sprayed. Okay, and so if those are cupping, it indicates to me that it's more of a genetics by environment. One thing you have to remember, guys, is that the cupping is actually formed by an auxin. Okay, and you got to remember that auxin is a normal hormone within the plant. So if we go from cool conditions to all of a sudden really, really hot, the plant will tend to produce a lot of auxin on its own, and each variety is going to be a little bit different. And I think what we're seeing is some of the genetic background that the Enlist trait platform in particular has is a little bit more susceptible to that. Now, did it affect yield? No. Okay, but it did cause a little bit of cupping, cause a little bit of wrinkling. Another thing that I think may be contributing to this is actually this type of scenario here. Okay, there are some, well, I did see quite a bit this year, group 15s causing issues. And that, I think personally, is just due to the drier weather. We just brought up enough of that group 15 to cause some kind of more of a heart-shaped appearance. And this really isn't a very good picture. This is more of a dicamba. I don't have a great picture in this, but understand that that heart shape, that drawstring type appearance, this is more dicamba because it's got that cobra head, that little thing there. With a heart shape type appearance, that would be the group 15 type damage. Realistically, guys, with any of these, whether it's an environmental thing or a group 15, it's going to grow out of it within about 2 to 3 leaves. Okay, and so that was another good indication that it wasn't dicamba, because even a very small rate of dicamba will usually affect 4 to 8 leaves as it comes out. Okay, so that was also a pretty good indication that dicamba probably was not the contributing factor. Okay, so just some words for thought there. It does draw some attention, and so we definitely want to be having that conversation. Hopefully, as these Enlist trait starts to really churn in the portfolio, we're going to see more and more beans that have some tolerance to that. Okay. All right. So let's talk about each one of these platforms and some of the key things that we're looking at for this year. So 4 tips to successful application here. First and foremost, have the right nozzle. So we're going to talk about nozzles, but one of the keys we recommend for the dicamba, a TTI nozzle. Now, is that an ideal nozzle for coverage? Absolutely not. You take a look at TTI nozzle at 10 gallons per acre, we're barely getting that plate covered. Now, here's the thing, guys, and I know that this is going to, this is not going to help some of our operational things, but if you have farmers that spray their own, or as a professional applicator, you should be closer to 20 gallons per acre with this TTI tip. Okay, and the reason why is because we have been getting some reports of weeds escaping dicamba when they're going this lower rate. Now, 10 gallons per acre is not a labeled rate. It used to be, and that's why these pictures were taken. But even at 15, you could still have some spots out in the field that are being missed by these extremely large droplets. Okay, and this is also, guys, what's leading to some of the problems that we're having with the volunteer corn control as well. Yes, there is an antagonistic effect between dicamba and clethodim, but we're also not helping ourselves in the fact that we're not getting good coverage. And although clethodim, fusilade, select section, all of those types of chemistries are technically mobile in the plant, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need coverage, because they are mobile, but they are selectively mobile. They don't move a real long ways. Okay, and so we need to have very good coverage with that. And so with the dicamba, I recommend doing a TTI nozzle with 20 gallons per acre. Okay, the minimum is 15, but 20 gallons is going to give you a much better application. Okay, other things, make sure you're conditioning your water. Okay, one of the best products that we have on the market would be Class Act Ridian. And the reason why, in the past, we've always used AMS, right? And what AMS did was the sulfate version of that, the sulfate part of that, would grab on to these cations and prevent them from dyeing up glyphosate, and the nitrogen would attach to the glyphosate, making it more active. Because of the dicamba technology, we cannot use AMS-based water conditioners anymore. And so we actually developed Class Act Ridian, which goes through and chelates these individual irons, calciums, magnesiums, all of those. And so you can see, I played the video. Unfortunately, when I play videos, I didn't think about that. Oh, yep. Well, we will send out the slides there, but basically what that chelation does is it wraps around that iron and makes that basically unable then to go through and be able to combine with that glyphosate. So that's going to be a key factor. Also with Class Act Ridian, you are getting surfactant with it as well, which definitely helps get more into the plant for sure. And so you get a lot better activity with that. Now, the problem with dicamba is you do need to add a lot of things to the tank. But here's the thing, guys, with these products that are trying to shove everything in one jug, unfortunately, you're getting very little water conditioner and sometimes no surfactant. Okay, and for us, going into 2022, where glyphosate is going to be tight, okay, a lot of us are going to be using maybe 22 fluid ounce rate of glyphosate. One of the things that we have problems with that 22 fluid ounce rate of glyphosate is that it can be tied up in the water very readily. Okay, now at 32 fluid ounces or even 44, we were getting great control of grasses, no problem. And really the glyphosate is in there mostly for the grass control, but it does help on the broadleafs as well. The issue with going to that 22 fluid ounce rate now, which is probably going to be the standard this coming year with the glyphosate shortage, the issue is we might see some sensitivity to the grasses going down. And in fact, I actually got calls this summer where guys were going 22 fluid ounces or less, and they were just for the grass control, and they were missing foxtails, especially giant foxtail. And for those of you guys that don't know, it's very challenging to get grass control in corn without glyphosate. And especially in soybeans too, we do have troubles with that as well. So definitely want a water conditioner in there. Using those higher rate water conditioners are going to work better. Okay, here's just some look at the control. At 0.75% volume for volume, it does do a pretty good job. However, as you can see, if we go up to 1%, we did have statistically better results at the 1% level as compared to the 3/4. So if you get into a situation where you have a higher or bigger weeds than you're supposed to, I would bump up that Class Act Ridian rate to get better, more consistent control. Okay, and the water conditioners are not just for the glyphosate. It also helps with the dicamba as well. Dicamba and 2,4-D, and actually things like Select, Section, Fusilade, all of those types of products are considered weak acid herbicides. Okay, and weak acid herbicides can very easily be bound up by calcium, magnesium, and iron. So it's not just for the glyphosate, it's also for all of these other weak acid herbicides that we're adding into the tank. Okay, another concern that we have with dicamba is some of the off-target movement. Because soybeans are very sensitive, it doesn't take a whole lot to see off-target movement damage down in the field. Okay, and one of the things that we were surprised at the first year out of the gate with dicamba, we're using all these TTI nozzles. We should be having almost zero driftable fines, right? Okay, it's less than 1%, especially with that DRA in there, brings you down to almost 0.5% driftable fines. But yet we were still seeing off-target movement. Well, one of the things that we discovered through the wind tunnel up in River Falls is that part of the problem is that if you have any kind of light breeze or even forward movement in the field, the problem that we run into is that we have what's called bag formation. Okay, how that works is you'll notice up here, this TTI nozzle, when it has a, oh yeah, sorry, Darren. When it has a DRA in it, what ends up happening is that DRA thickens up that solution, and basically it causes the water or the pesticide spray as it's coming out of the nozzle to basically form this sheet. Well, what ends up happening, guys, is that if you get any sort of crosswind or anything like that, basically what ends up happening is you get this bag formation, or basically the wind blows this bag up, and when that breaks apart, what you end up with is all these fine driftable fines. Okay, and so that was one of the biggest causes of some of the off-target movement that we saw the first and second year that dicamba was brought out. Okay, now the risk that we have with that is that if you get a lot of these, you can get quite a bit of off-target movement. That was the reason why we started to put 2 ounces of interlock in with that, because it dramatically decreased the amount of off-target movement that we saw. Okay, here's just another look at it. Okay, and this one really shows a nice picture of those bags and the rupturing. Think of like a balloon, or not a balloon, a bubble, right? If you're blowing bubbles, when that pops, you get all these small driftable fines, and that's what we were seeing. Okay, and that's part of the reason our lead recommendation last year was to go with interlock. We reformulated a new product, and this one is exclusive to Winfield United, called Ultralock, that prevents this from occurring. And so with that, we're able to dramatically decrease the amount of driftable fines that we have. And we'll get a little more into this when we get into the adjuvant section and talk about interlock and master lock and all the differences there. But this product is really going to make a difference when it comes to the amount of bag formation and the off-target movement. So this is going to be our #1 product for the dicamba acre. Okay, and this is going to be the rates, 6 fluid ounces with both XtendiMax and Tavium, and then Ingenia will be at 4 fluid ounces. It does improve the amount of driftable fine reduction that we see, as opposed to on target even. And in addition, guys, it's much easier to work with as well. Pours out of that jar, absolutely no problem. Really a neat product, something that we're excited about. Does help considerably with some of those driftable fines. And it actually helps too with the amount of nozzles that can be utilized as well. Before, with the on target, with that guar based, we were pretty much stuck with this TTI nozzle. This with the Ultralock, we have quite a few more options, including the UR nozzle from Wilger. So really a good option for a lot of different adjuvants, or a lot of different applications. Okay, final thing, VRA, quite a few different ones on the market. Basically, guys, what that's doing is it's reducing the pH, or sorry, buffering the pH, so it's actually increasing the pH so that you don't have volatility. Okay, so with that, we do have one called Volt Edge. Okay, that one's pretty much standard across the industry. You won't see a whole lot of differences between them. One of the ones that we're really excited about this year is that we do have a new product called Maxin Potassium. And Maxin Potassium is a potassium acetate. And the reason that potassium acetate is really important, that formulation, is because it actually buffers the capacity of that tank mix. So you don't get that increase, or you don't get the decrease in pH. And so with the Maxin Potassium, not only are you getting a VRA, but you're also getting a potassium source, which, you know, if you're going to make the mix anyway, you might as well get a little extra potassium. Now, is it much? No. Okay, it's not going to replace hardly anything at all, but it will help you get through a couple days worth of potassium needs for soybeans. So it's something where I wouldn't necessarily go out there claiming that it's going to get you a whole lot of potassium, because it's not. Okay, but what it does do is, hey, you get your VRA with it and you get a little extra potassium. So here would be our recommendations for more of the premium versus value versus base adjuvant recommendations. Premium is going to get you your best overall control and most consistent control, which is going to be important this year. On the Enlist side, my lead recommendation for nozzle selection is going to be the AIXR nozzle. Okay, that's one that's going to give us our best droplet size for all of the different applications that we're going to make. Okay, now one of the things that we do need to consider with either dicamba or 2,4-D is the antagonism that we get with this. Okay, now I'm going to say that I found clethodim to be a little bit better, which isn't really, these are different pictures from a different agronomist, but I would say that I found that clethodim-based products are a little bit better with the section, or with the Enlist, whereas the Fusilade is a little bit better with the Extend technology. Okay, so really when you're looking at it, which we might not have a lot of choices just because of how tight some of these are. But if I was going to go dicamba and I wanted a product that was going to really do a consistent job of killing our volunteer corn, Fusilade is probably going to be a little bit better option. Okay, not saying clethodim or section 3 or select max wouldn't work. You're just going to have to go a higher rate and make sure, guys, do not leave out the oils. Okay. On the other side of things, with the Enlist, I think Fusilade is going to work better than what section 3 is going to work better than the Fusilade. Okay. Other things, tank mixes, definitely going to want to make sure you're mixing these in the right order. Although I haven't had a lot of issues with the 2,4-D side of things, but just make sure you're getting that in the right order. Make sure that you have a water conditioner, especially with the Enlist one. And I know Darren's going to cover tank mixes and cover water conditioners next week, but guys, make sure that you have a water conditioner in with 2,4-D and actually dicamba as well. Okay, it does make a very big difference. Our lead recommendation is going to be with Class Act NG because it gives us much more consistent control than just with Enlist 1 on its own. Okay, here's Enlist 1. Then here's Enlist 1 plus Roundup plus Class Act. And the most important thing, this is on grass weeds. Okay, so where we're going to have lower rates of our Roundup and our glyphosates, definitely want to make sure that we have a water conditioner in the tank with it. You can see that these at every single rating date was statistically significant better with the Class Act NG. Okay. Another thing, I have been hearing reports from the field that Corteva is claiming that as long as you have Enlist 1 in the tank, you don't need any other drift control agent. Okay, if it's just Enlist 1 in the tank, I would agree. You can see here's Enlist 1 alone, here's Enlist 1 plus interlock. There's actually not a lot of difference between these. So if you're just going with Enlist 1, I would agree with them. Okay, if you're just going with Enlist 1 and something like, for example, Section or Fusilade, I'd agree with them. But if you're adding glyphosate or if you're adding Liberty to the tank or adding some of our other chemistries to the tank, you'll see that there's a significant reduction in driftable fines when you put in interlock. Okay, so if you're adding anything other to the tank, I would highly recommend having Enlist 1 with interlock versus just Enlist 1. Okay, because that Liberty or that glyphosate changes the characteristics of that tank mix, and we do get a lot more off-target movement. Okay, and you can see that coverage here. Here's a video I don't dare play, but that one is a cool video. Might have to call IT and figure that out. Here's some just additional pictures on this. Guys, we did struggle a lot with controlling volunteer corn, regardless of whether 2,4-D or dicamba was in the tank. We did have to go a higher rate of things like Section 3 and Fusilade this year to get decent control. Okay, and so with that, we definitely need to be considering that next year. So here's a cool picture from actually our plot up in Vincent there. I think with this year, guys, with how hot and dry we were, we probably should have gone with MSOs versus crop oils. Okay, as you go west in the United States, okay, a lot of people assume that with the extra heat, people out west would be using less oils. The thing about it is, though, guys, you cannot just look at the heat. You have to look at the heat and the humidity. Okay, we had very high heat, but we had very, very low humidity. What that does is it causes you to develop a very thick, waxy cuticle on, in this case, the corn's leaf surface. And it's very hard to get that chemistry to go in and kill the plant in that case. Okay, and so what we found was, first of all, we needed to increase the heat level. So make sure we have crop oil, but in a lot of cases, guys, we were better off going to MSO this year. Okay, another thing, and so if you really want consistent control, MSO is going to give you better control with this volunteer corn. Now, if we go back to more of a normal year, or we're a little bit cooler and wetter, are we going to see more crop response with MSO? Yes. But you are going to get better, more consistent weed control as well. Okay, so that's one thing that you have to talk to your farmers about. And if we're going to be relying on these group 1 chemistries to control a lot of our grasses, we might want to consider putting an MSO in with that versus a crop oil. Okay, so with the crop oil would be like Superb, and MSO would be like a Destiny or a Strike Lock. It's something that we're going to have to talk to our farmers about. And unfortunately, guys, if we do have cooler, wetter conditions, we are going to probably see a little bit more crop response. Now, will the crop come out of it? Yeah, it'll be fine. But it's something we do have to consider. Okay, another thing we have to consider is raising the rates. Now, this is last year, or this is actually 2020, the answer plot in 2020. We were able to kill corn dead with 3 ounces of Section 3. That was not the case this year. We were not able to get hardly any control with Section 3 at 3 fluid ounces. Even with the Superb in there, we had to be at the higher rate. Okay, and that hot, drier conditions seemed to be what was driving that. So it's something to consider. Make sure that we have that and understand that. Another thing to consider is that this is going to be an issue going forward. So if you're looking at some of these farmers that have a really bad corn rootworm problem, for example, this last year, and maybe have a lot of volunteer corn, you might want to separate these 2 applications. And I know that not a lot of people want to hear that, but honestly, that might be your best way forward. Okay, so all things to consider. The last part of this, the last half hour, I want to spend talking about managing droplet size. Okay, because this is really important to making sure that we have good overall control. Okay, and it all comes down to what type of chemistry you have. With a contact type chemistry, wherever that droplet hits on that leaf surface, that's where we're going to get control. And I see my droplets are no longer lining up, but trust me, wherever you hit that, wherever you hit on that plant, that's where we're going to get decent control. Whereas a systemic is actually going to move throughout that entire plant. Okay. Now, as a systemic, do you still need good contact? Yes. You just don't need as much of it. Okay. And so with a contact type carrier or coverage, we need really, really good coverage. We need higher carrier volumes and smaller droplet sizes. Guys, every time we drop our droplet size in half, we actually get 8 times as many droplets. And that's where our extra coverage is coming from, is the fact that if we drop that in half, we get 8 times as many droplets there. Okay, and so smaller droplets, higher carrier volume. Also, with off-target movement concerns, we don't have as many with this, because even if it did move off target, we'd speckle things up, but we wouldn't kill them. Okay, whereas with a systemic type chemical, so things like dicamba, glyphosate, 2,4-D, even things like Callisto Impact, Armazon, Select, Section, Fusillade, we don't need as good of coverage. Now, we still need coverage, but we don't need as good of coverage. We can get away with a little larger droplet size and a little bit lower carrier volumes. Now, I would argue with a contact type chemistry, I don't want to be any less than 20 gallons per acre. and I wouldn't want to actually be any more than 25. We actually start to see some of the benefits start to decrease over 25 gallons per acre. With a systemic type chemistry, that 12 to 15 gallons per acre is good for things like dicamba, 2,4-D, those type of things. Once you get into some things like Callisto, Select, those type of chemistries, I would argue you want to be at 15 gallons per acre at least. And if you're going to use that TTI nozzle, you probably want to be closer to 20. One of the things that I often get questions on, well, God, I just, we've had this, we've had these TTI nozzles, we got them for free. Why can't I just bump up my gallons per acre? That should give me more droplets. I shouldn't have any problems. So that's why I did this demonstration, okay? So, and this is back in 2018. I didn't redo the demonstration because I have limited space out in the answer plots. But this is really cool looking at Liberty. So Liberty is a contact type chemistry, right? Here's a TTI 110-02 nozzle with 20 gallons per acre. Didn't kill hardly anything. The reason why is because, again, if you don't have a good good droplet size, you won't get enough coverage in the canopy. Okay, here's an XR nozzle at 10 gallons per acre, and realistically this is too low for Liberty, but we still got pretty decent control on this wheat. Okay, the next one over, this next plot over, was actually with 20 gallons per acre. It was completely clean. Okay, so nozzle makes a huge difference on what type of or how good a control you get. Okay, another question I always get on the nozzles is what type of nozzle should I use, and how does that how quickly does that wear out? Okay, here's actually a study, and I think this is done in France, yeah, looking at how quickly each one of these different nozzles wear out. Okay, so stainless or brass was by far the worst at basically 26% by 50 hours here. Stainless steel was next at 15%, so fairly good. Then you start looking at some of these other ones, these PV, DF, and then polyacetal. So this polyacetal is those more of those plastic-based nozzles, and that's why you're seeing more companies go to these polyacetal nozzles. You can see we got significantly less wear over time. And so you'll see that basically all of the AIXR nozzles are this type. You're getting to see more of the AI nozzles. The TTI nozzles are all of this. You're seeing more of the XR nozzles. Definitely leads to less wearing over time. Overall, if you're cleaning them out improperly, I'm going to say that the stainless steel are going to last longer. If you're cleaning them out properly and you're not using any kind of sharp objects or anything on it, these polyacetal, the plastic nozzles, are going to last longer. Now, I always get the question of, well, how long does it last? It's really hard to say, guys. This is where calibration is really, really important. Make sure you're calibrating your nozzles every year, going through and testing to make sure all of them are within spec. Okay, and usually I like to be within about 10% of whatever that range is. So for example, for 110 03 nozzle, so it should be putting out 0.3 gallons per minute at 40 psi. I usually like to be within 0.27 up to 0.33. So that'd be a 10% range for those nozzles. And the reason why it's a 10% range is because there can be a little bit of difference depending on where that nozzle is on the section. So for example, if you have a nozzle towards the outside edge of that section, you usually will get a little bit higher pressure than on the inside. And so that's why I want to have a little bit of wiggle room there. But if it's outside of that 10%, you're going to want to replace that nozzle. Okay, gallons per acre also makes a very big difference. So here's an AI nozzle at 10 gallons per acre versus an AI nozzle at 20 gallons per acre. Okay, and based on this, this is how I go through and evaluate which nozzles I'm going to utilize. Okay, the first thing I like to do is figure out my size of nozzle. So if I'm running, for example, 15 gallons per acre at 40 PSI, and I want to go as fast as I possibly can, we're going to go into these nozzle books, and each one of them has it. I'm using TeeJet for an example, but whether it's TeeJet, whether it's Hypro, Wilger, Lecter, any one of these nozzle types, Hypro, yeah, I mentioned Hypro. Each one of these has these types of charts. So if I want to do 15 gallons per acre, pressure at 40 PSI, and I want to go as fast as I possibly can, what I'm going to look at is just the 40 PSI. Okay, so that's all I'm taking out here. Here's my 40 PSI lines. So I'll just go over until I find my 15 gallons per acre. So for example, 110.02 at 4 miles per hour, I will be putting out 15 gallons per acre at 40 PSI. Okay, now I don't want to go that slow, so I'm going to keep going down. 110.025, I can do at 5 miles per hour. 110.03 at 6 miles per hour, 8 miles an hour at an 04, all the way down to 110.06 at 12 miles an hour. I can be putting out 15 gallons per acre. Okay, so that's how you can use these charts. So we're going to try another one here. 15 gallons per acre, 40 PSI, 8 mile an hour. Okay, so now we use it a little bit different. We're going to go down this 8 mile an hour line until we hit that 15 gallons per acre. You'll notice we need a 110.04 nozzle for this application. Okay, final one, 20 gallons per acre, 40 PSI, 10 miles per hour. So if I go down my 10 mile an hour line and I continue to go down, well, the most that I can get is 17.8 gallons per acre. Okay, so if I was to actually go that 10 mile an hour with this 110.06 nozzle, what would happen? What would happen is my rate controller would tell my pressure to increase, and I'm going to end up with a lot more driftable fines. Okay, so it's really, really important to make sure that we are indeed matching the pressure to the nozzle type that we're utilizing. Okay, so pick the size of nozzle. And the reason I picked the size of nozzle first is because it affects my overall spray quality, and it affects my actual droplet size as well. As I increase my gallons per acre and as I increase my nozzle size, I actually decrease the driftable fines, and you'll see that here in a little bit. Okay, each one of these though, each one of these herbicides, insecticides, all of them need a different size of nozzle. First of all, you'll notice that none of our nozzles need a very fine spray quality here. It's because a lot of these driftable fines aren't going to do us any good. Okay, one of three things can happen to a driftable fine. Either A, they're going to drift off target, which obviously we're trying to avoid. B, they're going to evaporate. Okay, because what happens to a really small droplet? Well, what happens is, as it's coming out of the nozzle, it can't maintain its terminal velocity, and it usually ends up hanging up in the air. Okay, and so what we end up with then is this fog behind the sprayer. Well, none of those usually end up making it down to the crop canopy. They end up evaporating before they hit the target. And so therefore, if it's in a dry form, we are not going to get that into the plant. Okay, so not very many chemistries, or very few, require a very fine droplet size. Okay, as far as contact insecticide, fungicide, we can go down to the fine category. I prefer to stay in the medium category though. Okay, and with that medium category, it's going to fit my contact insecticide, fungicide, systemic insecticide, fungicide, contact foliar herbicide, and actually we can even get into the systemic foliar herbicides Although a lot of times people will jump up to this coarse category to avoid some of the off-target movement. Okay, but medium to coarse is going to be fine for that. Then we have our soil applied herbicides and then incorporated soil applied herbicides. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, let's go to the TeeJet catalog. Okay, TeeJet, we're going to start with an XR nozzle. Okay, one of the things you'll notice is that as I increase my size of nozzle, I also increase my droplet size. Okay, so for example, 110.04, let's go down to 110. 110.04, I have medium-sized droplets clear out to 40 psi here, and then I change to fine. If I'm running a 110.08, I actually have coarse droplets all the way throughout. Okay, so this is one thing that is a little bit tricky about this. A lot of people just want me to say, okay, use this nozzle for this, and use this nozzle for this, and use this nozzle for this. I can't really do that because of the fact that you could be running different size of nozzles. Because for example, if you were running 110.02, that's too fine for Liberty, for example. Okay, but if you're running an 06, Liberty works great for an XR nozzle. Even a 110.08 works really good for Liberty. Okay, and so identifying the droplet size that you need is really important. So for a contact herbicide like Liberty, like Cobra, Flexstar, those type of things, I'm going to want a medium to maybe coarse size droplet, no bigger. Okay, whereas things like 2,4-D dicamba Liberty, or sorry, 2,4-D dicamba glyphosate, those type of chemistries, I'm going to want to probably be in that very coarse to maybe even extra coarse droplet size. Okay, here's another good example. Here's a Turbo T nozzle. Okay, now this Turbo T at the smaller droplet size actually works fairly well for Liberty. And they actually have a Turbo T twin as well that actually works very well for Liberty. Okay, but the key is when you get into these larger size nozzles, that's where we're either going to have to really bump up the pressure to get where I need to be for Liberty, or we need to switch back down to that XR nozzle. Okay, now notice this is the straight Turbo T. This is not the Turbo T Induction. Okay, and there is a difference here, and you'll see that very, very quickly. Okay, this is just a straight Turbo T. Next one I'll talk about is the AIXR, the Air Induction Extended Range Nozzle. Kind of a mid-range nozzle, works really good for things like our Group 27, so our Callistos, Impact, Amazons, those type of things, works good for glyphosate. It's a little bit big for Liberty, but if you're mixing Liberty with Enlist, this is going to be the best option for you. If you're just spraying Liberty, though, I would probably encourage you to go back to that XR nozzle. AI nozzle, pretty much going to be good for only things like dicamba, 2,4-D, and glyphosate. Very, very large droplet sizes. Okay, you can see that here. Finally, the Turbo T nozzle, it's like throwing bowling balls at the plant. Realistically, outside of the dicamba application, I would not use this nozzle. Okay, you can use them for a pre-application where you're not doing any burn down, but outside of the dicamba on soybeans, I would not use this nozzle. And it's because it provides such a huge droplet size there. Okay, so here is my recommendation by size of nozzle and by type of application. Okay, so this is the closest thing, the closest stab I've taken at identifying this nozzle goes with this nozzle goes with this nozzle goes with this. But notice and make sure you pay attention to the fact that my nozzle is changing depending on my size of nozzle. Okay, so my recommendations change with an 08 nozzle as compared to, for example, an O3 nozzle. Okay. As far as greenleaf goes, greenleaf, there's quite a few different combinations that you can make out of these. With these though, one thing I will tell you, if you're just going to use this top cap here, it does produce very fine droplets, which can be work well for things that need good coverage. Outside of that though, you can see that a lot of these provide fairly large droplet sizes. Okay, so there's a TDXL. So the TDXL is a combination nozzle. What you'll see here is once you get outside of the 11004, it becomes very hard to get into that medium category. And so unfortunately, this is going to work better as like an intermediate nozzle. Okay, and so using it for things like Callisto, Impact, Armazon, this works well for that. For your contact type chemistries, I would not use this nozzle. Okay. Another thing that gets people thrown off is they see a dual fan nozzle and their heads immediately go to, oh, I'm getting better coverage. Guys, you are not getting better coverage with a dual fan nozzle. It's all about droplet size, because in the end, when you start looking at a dual fan, all it's doing is just cutting it down. So for example, an O3 nozzle here, you're still putting out 0.3 gallons per minute. That orifice size is what sets the gallons per acre. Okay, so you're not changing your gallons per acre at all. So therefore, you're not getting any better coverage with these. Now, there's been some discussion and debate over the angle that it's coming in. In the end, guys, by the time you look at your boom height, these different angled nozzles are going to end up, by the time it hits the crop, going mostly down anyway, if it's a nozzle or a droplet of any size. So I'm not going to put a lot of faith behind them. Really, all that they're really doing is just splitting that nozzle up. But you can see, I would not recommend this for things like Liberty or anything like that, because your droplet size is way too large. Okay, for the most part, you're getting an ultra coarse, extra coarse, or very coarse droplet size. Even at the very high pressures, I would not recommend these for Liberty or any contact type chemistry. Okay, here's my recommendations for various chemistries here. You'll see we got our TDXL. When I say flat fan, what I'm talking about here is taking that cap off of the nozzle body here and using that as just a straight flat fan. So TDXL, TADFL, so you can get all of those there. Okay, Hypro actually has this really nice little flow chart here to guide you into what categories they want you to be in. They actually, a lot of these companies are starting to get apps as well that you can utilize to match nozzles. I don't know how good they are necessarily, but I'm sure they get you in the right direction there. Okay, so starting with the 3D nozzle, Hypro, which is actually owned by John Deere now, brought these out for fungicide applications. Their whole theory here is, again, they're coming at different angles. Don't know if it makes a lot of difference there, but here's an option if you want one that comes in at a slightly different angle. With these, what they're going to tell you to do is alternate, just like this picture shows, so that one's pointing forward, the next one's pointing backwards. And so with these, you're going to get a fine to medium-sized droplet. So these actually would work fairly well for things like Liberty, fungicides, insecticides, those type of things. Okay, same with their Guardian. Guardian would also be very similar to that XR nozzle, going to produce more of that medium to maybe coarse size droplet there. Guardian Air. So the Guardian Air is going to be very similar to the AIXR. Going to produce a little bit larger droplet size, more in that medium range. So works really good with Callisto, Impact, Armazon, Select Section, Fusillade. Works good for, actually, it works pretty good for dicamba and 2,4-D, but I don't think the Guardian Air is actually labeled for Enlist, so you can't utilize that. On the dicamba side, you can use ultra low drift nozzles, which produce a very, very large droplet size. And then another thing that makes Hypro unique is they have what's called a high flow nozzle. This is for nitrogen applications. And these ones are kind of cool because they're not a 110-degree fan, they're a 120-degree fan, and they're very, very large nozzles. They also produce very large droplet sizes. So works really good for nitrogen applications. Outside of that, I probably wouldn't use that, but it does work well for nitrogen applications. As far as my recommendations, here's my recommendations. You got your Guardian or your 3D. If you're small droplets, then you have your Guardian for O3s, because O3s, even that 3D gets a little small. Guardian Air for the mid-range, and ultra low drift for the larger range. The final one I'll bring up is Wilger. And the reason I bring up Wilger is because of the fact that these are the nozzles that work really well with pulsating type sprayers. Okay, so whether it be Aim Command, whether it be Exact Apply from John Deere, these are going to be my lead recommendation for those type of sprayers. And it's because it's a completely hydraulic tip. Okay, what that means is with the hydraulic tip, you have no air induction, you have no air being pulled in to make the droplets larger, and that works very well with a pulsating type sprayer. Okay, and so with that, you can see the different droplet sizes that you have with all these. Now this gets very cumbersome, so I'm just going to go straight to this. There's basically 5 different nozzles that they sell. Okay, you have the SR or the ER, SR, MR, DR, and then UR, which is their new one. Okay, and for that, and I didn't even include the UR because really the only thing I would use the UR for is for dicamba applications in soybeans. Okay, because that's the one that's labeled very similar to a TTI. Okay, but if you look at it, we're going to start out with our ER nozzle is going to be our smallest droplet size. That one you do have some potential to see some dirt pool fines. So only the largest nozzle are we going to use the ER for. Then we have our SR nozzles. That's going to be more similar to the XR, although it's going to be a little bit bigger than the XR nozzle. Then we're going to have our MR nozzle, which is our mid-range nozzle. It's a bigger droplet size, similar to the AIXR, but a little bit on the larger size than the AIXR. DR is going to be very similar to the AI nozzle for TeeJet. Very, very large droplet size. Works well for dicamba, 2,4-D, glyphosate, but it's a very large droplet. And then finally, they have the UR nozzle, which I did not include on this chart. The UR nozzle is a very, very large droplet size, very similar to the TTI, recommended only for dicamba applications in soybeans. So with that, we will send out these slides so that you have those. I'm going to go ahead.